We're talking hydrogen bombs as big as the Empire State Building, dropped from space.
Welcome back. I'm here again with Dr. John Brandenburg. John, welcome back.
Great to be back, Sean. I'm really enjoying talking with you and sharing what I've learned.
It's intriguing, that's for sure. So this mystery, Mars, was capable of supporting a rich variety of life, very similar to Earth, and then suddenly it wasn't. What happened?
Just think Mars was like Earth in every way, including having people like us. And then something happened. Now, what happened? Well, the first clue was that I was having a conversation with somebody at Sandia National Labs, and I showed him the very same xenon isotopes and argon-40 isotopes, which showed people that these rocks were from Mars. They were fresh lavas and they were from Mars, geologically speaking. The same things that made Mars stick out like a sore thumb from every other planet and other major body of isotopes is nuclear weapon signature. I was informed of that at Sandia Labs by somebody who, when he said it, realized he had said something he shouldn't have said. So he excused himself and departed. They had a large group at Sandia National Labs whose expertise was in monitoring the atmosphere to see if somebody was doing covert nuclear testing. And they would sample the atmosphere above certain places where suspicious things are reported to see if these isotopes were there in the atmosphere to confirm that.
So which specific data point did you show him that triggered that comment that,
I showed him
weapons?
I showed him a graph of the xenon isotope relative abundance on Earth, Jupiter, solar wind, the meteorites, even Jupiter, xenon 129 abundance and xenon 132, the two most abundant isotopes of xenon, are almost evenly matched every place in the solar system, including Earth, except at Mars, where there's 2.5 times more xenon 129 as there is 132. And this was first measured when the Viking landers landed on the surface. They had very good gas sampling. They landed at 2 different places, sampled the atmosphere, and they both agreed. Xenon 129 was hyperabundant on Mars compared to Earth. And also argon-40. There was 10 times more argon-40 than argon-36 on Mars than there was on Earth, which is the planet. And this has been verified with other, like planet Jupiter and places like that. Mars sticks out like a sore thumb in these isotopes, especially the xenon 129 is now, after half a century, is still considered a mystery. They cannot account for it. And they recently were on Mars with more gas sampling, and they confirmed that, yes, there's a whole bunch of xenon 129, a whole bunch of argon-40, and we don't know why. Argon-40 comes from the decay of radioactive potassium, begins with a K in the chemical alphabet. So potassium absorbs neutrons from some kind of nuclear reaction and becomes radioactive and then emits, it decays into argon-40. If there are a lot of neutrons, however, it doesn't just decay, it actually turns into argon-40 immediately. It has to get hit with 2 neutrons to do that. So if there are a lot of neutrons, you get a whole bunch of argon-40 immediately. So the young Mars meteorites have a lot of argon-40 in them. They also have a lot of xenon 129. The very ancient Mars meteorites don't have this. So whatever happened on Mars happened in recent geologic time. Now, xenon 129, you can make that from the breakdown of iodine 129 which is a radioactive isotope that has 16 million year lifetime, very short on geologic time scales.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another substance on Mars that was believed to have caused the xenon abundances on Earth. That's plutonium-244. Plutonium-244 was discovered on Earth after the first hydrogen bomb exploded. It's a synthetic element. It only lasts 80 million years, which is short compared to geologic time. So if there was plutonium-244 from the Earth's foundation, it's all gone now, along with all the iodine-129. Iodine-129 decays first into xenon-129. Plutonium-244 decays into the heavier isotopes like 132. So that's what gives the balance of the two xenon. But on Mars, there's just the 129. The 132, which one would have expected if Mars and Earth formed the same way, is not there. So they speak of the mystery in terms of, and they call it a mystery. After 50 years, I saw an article written 20 years after Viking. They called it a mystery because they said, where's the plutonium-244? It should be there too. It's not there. And so now they have no explanation for this. The big sore thumb. As it turns out, though, I was able to find in the open literature that you can get xenon-129 in large amounts, greater than 132. And that's in what's called an R process event. R process, R stands for rapid. Nuclear reactions happening on a very rapid timescale driven by neutrons from like fusion. There's two places R process occurs. One is in the supernova. Big star explodes. Big star gets its core full of heavy elements like uranium and things like that. And then suddenly the whole thing blows up. And that creates a lot of xenon-129, twice as much as 132.
Mm-hmm.
And the other place, the other known source is a hydrogen bomb explosion.
So the
Those
solar
are the only two known sources.
and the supernova, if there were a supernova, Earth would have the same exact chemical similar composition.
It
and
would
we
have
wouldn't
destroyed
be
the
here.
solar system.
Right.
There was no supernova on Mars. It has to have been the only known process that can cause this is a hydrogen bomb explosion besides a supernova.
Which
When
is
we
to say
do-
that you're not saying it was 100% hydrogen bomb explosion. It could be some process that we haven't hitherto discovered or whatever. Right.
It could always be something completely unknown. Whatever happened on Mars, though, it was so energetic. It released 10 to 100 times the energy released when the Chicxulub impact occurred on Earth that wiped out the dinosaurs. 10 to 100 times the energy. So we had shock waves going all the way around the Earth during the Chicxulub impact. On Mars, the entire atmosphere. There's not only evidence that large shock waves went around Mars when this happened in the north of Mars, but that almost the entire atmosphere was blown off into space. This happened on a planet only half the size of Earth, so it doesn't have as strong a gravity. And of course, the amount of energy per unit of area on Mars is 4 times greater. If it was a Chicxulub event, it would have been 4 times more energy per unit of area on Mars. But instead, it was 10 to 100 times Chicxulub. So we're talking 40 to 400 times more energy per unit square yard of Mars surface. Mars atmosphere was blown off. There's even signs now that the nitrogen, which may have ignited in the Mars atmosphere. One of the great fears when they first started testing nuclear weapons was that could excite nuclear reactions in the nitrogen. Apparently that happened on Mars too. So what could have caused this? There are only 2 known things. The supernova, we know that that didn't happen. The only thing that we know of caused that is a hydrogen bomb, massive hydrogen bomb explosion. Now, Another thing about hydrogen bombs is they release an enormous amount of neutrons. This can help ignite the nitrogen in the air, but what it does also is it bombards the rocks. The rocks have potassium in them. The potassium then forms radioactive potassium, gets hit with another neutron, boom, out comes argon-40. So they've also found a lot of krypton-80 on Mars, another sign of neutron bombardment. And those are in the recent meteorites on Mars, not the old ones. Only the very recent, the youngest Mars meteorites show signs of this neutron bombardment and have the high levels of xenon in it. So what this means is whatever happened on Mars, this R, what we call an R process event, has to have happened in recent geologic time. It happened before there were dinosaurs on Earth, but it's still within the time frame of like the great Permian extinction happening on Earth. Happened about the same time as this thing happened on Mars. And this thing took the planet from being like Earth to being like it is now. So we have signs of enormous neutron bombardment of the Martian surface and atmosphere. We have all of xenon-129 in the atmosphere, which is symptomatic of our process. A big hydrogen bomb would do this. It's the only known thing that would do it. I'm not saying that's what did it. I'm just saying it's the only known thing. Then we also found 2 hotspots on Mars of radiation in the north where the ocean used to be. One of them is near Cydonia Mensa. The other one is near this other site called Galaxis Chaos in Utopia. So they seem to be correlated with the sites of what look like archaeology on Mars. Now, the hotspots are not dangerously radioactive now. The sensors they're using are so sensitive, they can pick up just slightly elevated. They're more radioactive than the surrounding territory. And the radioactivity is in potassium, radioactive potassium. So it looks like that area of Mars got bombarded heavily with neutrons. And the other thing that shows up in the same hotspots overlapping them is thorium. Now, thorium is a heavy element like uranium, and it can be used in hydrogen bombs. When you have a hydrogen bomb, this used to be classified. It's no longer classified. A hydrogen bomb goes off in 3 steps. First, there's a small atomic bomb goes off. Mm-hmm. It goes off inside of what's called a hohlraum, which is a radiation casing. It looks like a watermelon. Inside this watermelon-shaped thing, which is hollow, is you have an atomic bomb at one end, and then you have a sphere of hydrogen isotopes, hydrogen and lithium isotopes, turns out. And the atomic bomb goes off. The shock waves start out by the atomic bomb, and then they come to a focus on the other end of the watermelon casing. They compress the ball of hydrogen and lithium isotopes, and that's when the hydrogen reaction occurs. The lithium turns into hydrogen. That's what makes the hydrogen fusion bomb. Now, when that bomb goes off, there's a third step. The fusion reaction releases very powerful neutrons, much more powerful than like you find in a nuclear reactor. The watermelon casing can be constructed of uranium or thorium or a mixture of the two. And the neutrons going out and striking the uranium casing, the radiation case, will trigger the splitting of atoms even in ordinary uranium, uranium-238, which normally never operates in a nuclear reactor. It's too hard to break. But you can split it with the fusion. So this is the third reaction in a hydrogen bomb, and it doubles the yield. Half of the yield in a standard hydrogen bomb in the arsenal comes from the radiation case fissioning. This produces all of the really bad fallout, the strontium-90, the iodine that really kill people over a long period. Comes from that radiation case. blowing up. And you can make it out of either uranium or thorium. The big nuclear weapon they tested at Amchatka in Alaska was for an anti-missile warhead. They used a lot of thorium in it. It's called the W-71 warhead. You can look it up on Wikipedia. And it was full of thorium. They didn't explain why. They just said that that's what they'd used. So on Mars, you find these hot spots of radiation, 2 of them, of potassium, and overlaying them is thorium. And then if you go to the south of the planet, where the shock waves would have converged, come to a focus on the far side of the planet in the south, you find another hot spot in uranium and thorium. So the shock wave carried radioactive thorium and potassium around the planet and collided with itself and made a pile of that in the bottom. So this shows the shock waves. So we now know where the explosions apparently occurred and where they were so powerful as to send shock waves all the way around Mars' surface. And then you ask, okay, what could have caused this? If you look at the ground where these hot spots are, it's utterly smooth. There's no craters. There's no like volcanoes putting out strange lava or something there. No, there's nothing. All it is darker area. It's a darker area than the rest of Mars. And this means the explosions were airbursts. They exploded many miles above the surface of Mars. And this is like, unfortunately, like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There were no craters at Hiroshima and Nagasaki because they made the bombs go off in midair about 1,000 feet above the surface because that intensified the shock waves and created firestorms at both cities. The firestorms killed more people than atomic bombing, than the actual explosion. So on Mars, apparently, there were 2 massive hydrogen bomb explosions, and they went off in midair. And if you ask how big they were, because we have estimates of how much energy released, we're talking hydrogen bombs as big as the Empire State Building dropped from space. There's no way you could launch something like that from the ground and have it go off in midair. In fact, you'd be blowing yourself up. This was apparently dropped from space by somebody else, it looks like. Now, we have all of the surface and atmosphere shows signs of intense neutron bombardment. We have the xenon 129. We have the radioactive hotspots. And if you look at the sites, there's glass. When they've set off nuclear bombs on towers on Earth or dropped them from the air, they create what's called trinitite. They melt the soil beneath the bomb explosion into glass, greenish glass called trinitite. Another thing that hydrogen or atomic bomb explosions do is they create a lot of nitric acid, which actually etches glass. At the sites of these radioactive hotspots, they find big glass deposits. They're not found anyplace else. They're not found around the volcanoes on Mars. They're only found at these 2 spots. And it is trinitite glass, apparently etched with nitric acid. So
when they find this glass,
what's that?
How did they find this glass? Was it observed from?
It was observed from space using infrared.
Okay.
Infrared picks up this type of glass from space, and the acid etching of the glass can also be detected with infrared. Creates a certain feature in the infrared spectrum of the glass. So in the visible light, it looks like there are 2 dark areas on Mars. Cydonia Mensa was the place where the bomb was the biggest. And it's a big dark spot on Mars. And the same with the Utopia site. Now, interestingly enough, both the Viking landers landed, one near Cydonia Mensa site and one near the Utopia site. So it's as if the government was aware. They'd flown several probes past Mars. Apparently, they picked up the radioactivity. They were very good at detecting radiation in the Cold War. They developed a lot of very sensitive instruments. So apparently they said they wanted to land at Cydonia, but then they switched and they said, oh no, Cydonia is too rocky after they found the face there. So they decided to land in Utopia, and it's near the second hotspot. So apparently the government knew where to land to look for stuff.
Quick question about nuclear weapons capabilities. If you did an airburst that close to ground zero, would structures like pyramidal structures and things like that be able to withstand?
I think so. If they're massive stone, they'll survive. Anything made of wood or steel, skyscrapers would all be gone. People ask me what the level of civilization on Mars was. I say, well, it looks primitive, but of course, that is the stuff that survives. If, God forbid, there should be a big nuclear war on Earth, the pyramids and the Sphinx would survive just fine. All of our cities would turn to dust, be burned out, and then finally, after 1 million years, turn to dust. We're talking about stuff that's 100 million years, several 100 million years old. Now, it's been in the deep freeze on Mars, so that to some extent is preserved. And because they don't have rain and snow on Mars, that cuts down in the erosion rate, and the atmosphere is very thin, so it can't carry a lot of dust. So Mars is the perfect place to preserve things. But if there was an advanced civilization on Mars and it was destroyed by this attack, all traces of it would be buried deeply on Mars. What would survive would be the ancient massive monuments that they had built, like the pyramid and the Sphinx would stand on Earth, or the pyramids in Yucatan. I stood on top of the Great Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico. It was a great spiritual moment for me. And it would still be standing after a nuclear war. The people who built it knew what they were doing. It's still standing. And so this means, what can we conclude from this? There's now very strong evidence there was this thermonuclear holocaust on Mars. It does not appear to have been natural. There is no known natural thing that could cause this. I thought perhaps there had been natural nuclear reactors on Mars and that they went unstable and blew up. That would have created enormous craters, because natural nuclear reactors, which occurred on Earth, have to occur underground. And then if they exploded, they would create big craters.
Yeah, because there's
no craters. There's nothing. It's just flat. Just like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, just flat space where the bombs went off, directly below them.
How many kilotons do you think each one of these things would have to be?
Oh, we're talking like 1 billion megatons. It's absolutely incomprehensible. But if you're building these things in outer space, you can build them as big as the Empire State Building. And the Russians showed with their enormous nuclear test, the Tsar Bomba, that you can scale hydrogen bomb weapons as big a size as you want. The Russians proved that.
How big was that again, the Tsar Bomba?
That was 50 megatons.
Okay, yeah. So
they could have easily made it. They put lead in the radiation case instead of uranium because they wanted to reduce the fallout. But they could have doubled the yield if they'd made the casing out of uranium or thorium. So people have asked me, well, it could have been some weird solar flare hitting Mars' atmosphere. And I'm a plasma physicist, so we've been trying to harness fusion to stop global warming. And we're going to do it. But if it was that easy to make fusion, we've already made it. Not only that, if it was a solar flare, it would have been full of hydrogen and helium. That's what the sun is made out of, not thorium. There's hardly any thorium in the sun. Instead, you have these big spots of the radioactive potassium. That's easy to explain by the neutrons from the fusion. But thorium is not part of a solar flare. So this was not a solar flare phenomenon. You could say this is an unknown thing. We don't know what caused it. Well, we do know something that can cause this. And that's a hydrogen bomb. Rather than inventing something new, pulling it out of your ass scientifically. I mean, there's people who say there's pathological science. I say there's pathological skepticism. Denial is not just a river in Egypt. Pathological skepticism is really a just way of masking denial. When something, you can't accept an idea, you come up with all sorts of, pardon the expression, bullshit objections to it. Same thing happened when they found life signs in the Mars rock. I was at conferences hearing the leader of the group that founded at Johnson Space Flight Center. He was attacked ferociously, all these members of academia. They had 15 different explanations for everything he found in that rock that didn't involve life. He said to me afterwards at coffee, because I presented a paper there too on my Mars meteorites, he said, I can understand them being skeptical. I don't understand why they're so angry with me.
Yeah, that's the tell.
Because to find evidence, clear evidence of life on other planets is to upset a lot of apple carts. And a lot of it is just pure psychology. We imagine we're the center of the biological universe, even if we're not the center of the geometric universe. And that makes Miss Universe, the crown of Miss Universe, look especially shiny. Suppose you find out that there are other Miss Universe contests on other planets, and our Miss Universe candidates were not invited. Then this causes people to be upset. So we have this strong evidence of what appear to have been two massive thermonuclear weapon explosions on Mars. They left no craters. There were airbursts. This does not appear to have been natural. It looks like it was a targeted attack on Mars by somebody from space.
A quick, ignorant sounding question. So forgive me.
Sure.
What would the signature of like an antimatter weapon look like? Because that would certainly be
antimatter gives actually a different signature. We've made enough antimatter to make it's very easy to make a tiny antimatter explosion. All antimatter experiments end with a small explosion. They've finally gotten up to about the size of a firecracker of energy release. And it produces a lot of gamma rays, basically. And that's about all I know from the open literature. I know some of the labs have classified efforts to make antimatter weapons. Problem is, it's very difficult to store. You know, you're a former Army veteran. You know why the Army does not use nitroglycerin as its favorite explosive, even though it's more powerful and just about
very unstable.
That's right. And so is antimatter. If you let that antimatter out of that cage, boom, it's very unstable. It's like nitroglycerin. You can't use it as a military explosive. I'm sorry. So there is evidence, by the way, also, as they discussed in the Oppenheimer movie, the danger that they were afraid they might ignite the nitrogen in the air. Nitrogen is actually kind of an unstable nucleus. It's right in between. Oxygen and carbon are very stable nuclei, but nitrogen is just between them. And you can get that to participate in a lot of nuclear weapons, in a lot of reactions that release energy. And apparently that happened on Mars also. If you have a lot of neutrons, you can get a reaction going on the nitrogen in the air. By the way, most of the nitrogen in the atmosphere is nitrogen-14. If it's bombarded with neutrons, like after a nuclear weapon goes off, it makes a lot of nitrogen-15. And the 15, then if it absorbs another proton from another reaction, can actually create fusion. Right there. So that could have added energy to the nuclear explosion on Mars, igniting the nitrogen in the atmosphere. So this is all terrible. It's a terrible tragedy.
Roughly, when do you think this happened based on the analysis of meteorites?
Based on the analysis of the neutron irradiation of the meteorites, it apparently happened recently in geologic time, about 300 to 500 million years ago. That's before there were dinosaurs on Earth. So whoever did this is long gone. However, it basically shows that there may be intelligent technological forces out there on Earth that are deeply homicidal. So the rest of the universe... Genocidal. Yes, genocidal. Now, since we've seen a lot of genocide on Earth, that means, gosh, there are bad people out in space, just like there are on Earth. Not only are we not alone, we're not an aberration on the cosmos. We're fairly typical. This is mediocrity all over again. So we're not alone in the universe. And some of the people out there are probably not very nice. I'm sorry. I hate to break it to you. The rest of the universe, it's like the walking into that bar in Star Wars at Mos Eisley. You're expecting it all to be sweetness and light and more advanced than Earth. Now you walk into this dive bar in Mos Eisley, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, kind of the God figure, is with you with his lightsaber at the ready. And he says, we have to go in here, but watch your step. This place can get a bit rough. So we already knew, for instance, that we could be hit by an asteroid and wiped out like the dinosaurs. That's one of the few global catastrophes we know of that could wipe out human civilization.
Mm-hmm.
But we can stop that if we see the asteroid coming. We see it coming, you'd be amazed how inventive we will become to destroy that asteroid or deflect it. So the universe is a dangerous place because of asteroids. A comet could hit the Earth. We're going to have a big comet next year. It'll appear just before Election Day. Won't that cause tongues to wag? So we could be hit by a comet. That would destroy civilization on Earth. A supernova could go off someplace close by. Fortunately, we don't have any candidates. But if we look out in space, there are these gamma ray bursters, what's called the brightest of all time.
Boat.
The boat. Gamma ray burster would have sterilized our entire galaxy. It would have killed everything in our entire galaxy if it had gone off here. But it didn't. It went off billions and billions of years ago, far, far away from us. So basically, friends, the Earth is middle school. We're now going to high school. And just like middle school is a tough place, so is high school. I'm sorry. Or like, just imagine you're going to a new high school. Well, as it turns out, you came from a tough high school. The new high school is tough too. You're going to do okay. You did okay at the last high school. Everything's going to be fine. I went to a tough high school. I remember a guy pulling aside another guy in the hall and told him, "You gave me a dirty look last week." And the guy said, "No, I didn't." The guy was a lot shorter than he was. And the guy says, the bully says, "Are you calling me a liar?" That's the high school I went to. I got in 2 brawls in high school. I'm very proud of that. And I did pretty good in both of them, especially the last one. So anyway, okay, we're going to be okay. We have to deal with now is Mars, mediocrity, and Fermi's paradox. Mars confirms mediocrity. Mediocrity says the Earth is typical, and Earth people are typical of intelligent life in the universe. They build pyramids, they carve sphinxes. Okay, we found that on Mars. Mars is apparently a living planet like the Earth, had an ocean, had an oxygen atmosphere. Everything that happened on Earth happened on Mars, including the development of intelligent humanoid civilization that built pyramids and carved big faces. Okay, then it looks, and this is how I connect the dots, it looks like somebody else came along and destroyed Mars. They made it a radioactive pyramid of heads, which is doing one better from Genghis Khan. If a city resisted Genghis Khan, he would kill everyone in the city and erect pyramids of heads. This was to warn the other cities that when he showed up with his Mongol hordes, they were just supposed to open the gates and not resist. It was a campaign of terror because terror was a cheap way of waging war in those days. Mm-hmm. You can scare people really bad. They'll give you everything you want. All your gold, everything else of value, just give it to them. And they won't kill you. So somebody made, it looks like, an example out of Mars. There's even a line in the movie Star Wars where they destroy the planet Alderaan. And somebody asked why Alderaan, and Governor Tarkin says, because Tatooine, the reputed rebel base, is far too remote to make a good example. The Death Star was a terror weapon. They wanted to terrorize people into submission. So this is just the way I connect the dots at Mars. Other people are free to connect them however they like. But based on my knowledge of Earth history, which I consider a good example of what is typical of intelligent life in the universe, I'm sorry, we're not angels. I know that. Look at Earth history. So now, the good thing, we found this terrible tragedy happen. The good thing is now we know it, Sean. We know it. We know it happened. We know it can happen to us unless we become spacefaring. We have to go up to Mars, boots on the ground, find out what happened. I don't know what happened up there. I know what it looks like. We have to go up there and find out what the hell happened. Our survival could depend on it. And we have to do it in a hurry, too. And we have to send people up there with strong backs who can wield shovels and dig and have sharp eyes. They have to be trained in archaeology, find out what happened up there. Who knows? The idea of intelligent technological life that had a war, the number of scenarios just multiplies. We have to find out what happened up there so to make sure it doesn't happen here. We have to become spacefaring. We have to build up space defenses. That's how we avoid it happening here. It's the only way we can ensure long-term human survival in the cosmos that is not only full of intelligence like ourselves and beautiful, but also dangerous.
You also mentioned, I don't think during any of our recorded conversation, but when you made this discovery and I think published your paper, this is kind of around 1983, Operation Noble Archer.
There was Operation Able Archer that occurred in Europe. It was a very sophisticated NATO exercise, and it terrified the Russians. They thought it was a Trojan horse, that we were going to stage an attack in the middle of this supposed military exercise. Because they did the same things. Like they invaded Czechoslovakia by holding big war games on the border, and then suddenly the tanks just rolled. And so,
I mean, they literally just did that in Ukraine, right? They held this big exercise in Belarus, and then next thing you know, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
no, that's quite all right, Sean. You have a lot of military experience. The military would have done me good. I was almost drafted. My draft number was 55. Went up for my draft physical. I was A1, and then they stopped the draft. Then the Yom Kippur War broke out. So I realized, oh my God, they might call me up anyway. I might get a free trip to the Holy Land, courtesy of Uncle Sam, to the very valley of Armageddon. So I went through Able Archer, the Able Archer crisis at Sandia National Labs. And it happened just after the nuclear winter article by Carl Sagan in the newspaper inserts. And they didn't tell us we were in a nuclear crisis. We were actually this close to a nuclear war. We were closer to a nuclear war then than we were at the Cuban Missile Crisis. One off-course U.S. or West German jet fighter, one patrol that went across the border where it wasn't supposed to, could have triggered a full-scale nuclear war. So we went through that. Morale at our lab collapsed. People spoke to me of their despair. They felt that if a nuclear war happened, they wouldn't even have time to go home and get their kids and wives and get them off. The idea was to run to the hills and ride out the nuclear war in the hills. But then they found out about the nuclear winter. The nuclear winter would kill more people due to cold and starvation. After the nuclear attack, then the original attack and fallout had actually killed. So it caused great despair. I myself was in despair because I thought we're in a Mexican standoff with the Russians. We could start a war by accident and have a full-scale nuclear war, and everything would be destroyed. And Then I saw Christmas break happened, and I saw the work of DePietro and Molinar on the evening magazine the day after Christmas. They had the face on Mars and the pyramid nearby that they discovered. And they'd obviously done very good work. They were both electronic technicians. They'd taken the electronic versions of the pictures, they false color. Obviously, they found images of the face on two different occasions. That convinced me. Suddenly, I had hope for the future for the first time in years, really. I went to graduate school at a nuclear weapons lab, Livermore. We went through a small international crisis there, and I could see the tension building because people were afraid it would lead to a nuclear war. And there were people right in the command structure at Livermore on whether to use the hydrogen bombs or not. This is during the Polish solidarity thing. That happened when I was in grad school.
Was that 1981? Something like that?
1981, yes, 1981. Okay. And Reagan said...
Lech Walesa and all that stuff.
Lech Walesa, Jaworski, I can't remember, there was a Polish general. And Reagan said that we might have to invade Poland to help the Lech Walesa and the Solidarity people. I mean, he said that, and you could just feel the tension at the lab. I saw people who looked like they were dying of stress because of the crisis. And then, fortunately, Maggie Thatcher called up Reagan, said, "Quit talking like that. What do you want to do? Blow the place up?" So she got him to calm down and not talk like that anymore. So I'd gone through those two crises. So when I saw evidence of a past civilization on Mars, it gave me hope that maybe the Cold War will end, because if they find a dead civilization on Mars, then both the United States and the Russians will have to join forces and go up to Mars and find out what happened. It'll be a joint mission. And you notice Carl Sagan kept emphasized the idea of a joint Russian-American mission to Mars, because he was afraid of the same thing I was, that we're going to have a nuclear war if the Cold War kept going. So I got really enthused, and I found out there was an organized investigation centered at SRI.
No, of course.
Just out of a weird coincidence. It just happened to be at the same place as the remote viewing place was. So anyway, I joined that investigation, and the rest is history. I discovered the ocean. I discovered the phases at Galaxis Chaos, and I discovered the nuclear weapon signature in the Mars atmosphere because somebody told me it was there. And then I was able to verify it for myself. By the way, I showed it to, once I found out from the open literature that this was true, I showed the evidence I had to a lot of nuclear weapons experts I was working with in Washington, and they all agreed with me. Yes, that's nuclear weapon signature, the Xenon 129. But given their security clearances and security oaths, they couldn't talk about it publicly. So I have published this on numerous occasions, and no one has contradicted me.
When was the first time you published it? What year?
First time I published is about 2015.
Okay.
And I published it at a lunar planetary science conference. I didn't say there were hydrogen bombs. I just said there was evidence of large nuclear explosions. The first thing I talked about was natural nuclear reactors. Everybody liked that because they said, well, if it happened on Earth, it could happen on Mars. Then when I said, oh, no, they weren't nuclear reactors, because that gives a different signature, by the way. A nuclear reactor uses slow neutrons, S process, very different from R process. R process is a bomb. So once I found out it was R process, not S process, people said, oh, well, and they would just walk away. They knew this.
Yeah, it's cognitive dissonance, right? It's cognitive
dissonance would set in. So first thing I did when I had strong evidence of it from the open literature, I informed the Defense Intelligence Agency. I knew about them because one of their guys had been my buddy. And then
was this in 2015 when you did that, or was it long before?
No, this was roughly 2001. Okay. And we had a fellow who was a great guy. He was really smart. He was an amateur astronomer and taught astronomy class at one of the local colleges. And we thought that he was just a military retiree and was teaching astronomy. then he came to a conference with us, DePietro and I. It was in Washington, D.C. And he was standing there with us, and an Air Force colonel came up to us, introduced himself to Vince DePietro. Apparently he recognized him, said, "Hi, I'm Colonel so-and-so. I do appreciate your work on Mars." It's very interesting.
That wasn't.
And
that
then
wasn't
he
Colonel
turned
John
to this
Alexander,
guy
was it?
who'd been chumming around. What's that?
It wasn't Colonel John Alexander, was it?
No, it was not.
Okay.
I met John Alexander. No, it was not him. It's a different guy. And was he Air Force?
Air Force or no? He was.
He was
definitely
Army.
Yeah, this guy
Right.
was Air Force lieutenant.
This guy was Air Force Colonel.
Okay.
And so he introduced himself to Vince DePietro, who, he knew from publicity, and complimented him on his research. I thought that was very interesting. I was just standing there. He didn't know me. And then he turned to our buddy, the astronomer, and said, "Hi, Larry, how are things at the Defense Intelligence Agency?" And this guy was a real pro. He did not even bat an eyelash. He just said, "They're fine, Colonel. Thanks for asking." And the colonel walked away. And DePietro turns to me, eyes as big as saucers, because we now knew this guy was from the Defense Intelligence Agency. He wasn't retired military, as it turns out. He was active military, or he was part of the, Defense Intelligence Agency.
So why did the lieutenant colonel out him? Because clearly he was there to listen in on you and your friend, because he lied to you, right?
Well, he wasn't entirely forthcoming. I wouldn't say he lied. He was going to tell.
It could be he was retired military, but working as a civilian for the Defense Intelligence.
That's what it was.
Okay. So he wasn't lying.
When I found out that this had happened, and Larry excused himself shortly after to go use the restroom. We didn't see him again. Yes. His cover was blown thanks to this colonel in the Air Force.
Was there a colonel in the Air Force? Did he do it deliberately, or was he just like all shut?
Well, it sure looked like it. Sure looked like it.
Oh, that's
looked
great.
like he was deliberately blowing this guy's cover.
Probably didn't like the guy, right?
Go figure. There's a little thing we call inter-service rivalry. So I worked in an office full of intelligence people from different services, and they would all rag on the Air Force, saying that they were only people who had bivouacs in tents would have air conditioners.
We still do.
What's that?
Zoomies. We still do.
Yeah, well, you want to eat well. You want to eat well in the field. Just crash an Air Force facility. Go in there. Oh yeah.
And they don't like it. They don't like it at all. They don't like having dirty Army and Marine guys. And
you dog faces, ground pounders.
But we do all the work, so whatever.
Oh, the Marines especially held the Air Force in great disdain, and so that happened. But I had the guy's number. I didn't know what to say to him after that. But then when I found out what I found in the open literature and got it all confirmed, I called him up. His number still worked. I said, Larry, I found this stuff on Mars. I want to show it to somebody from the Defense Intelligence. I have to report it to somebody because I had a secure at Mars at the time. So I reported it to him. He came over, took careful notes, was very serious. And I said, what do you want me to do with this? I'm asking the agency, what should be done with this knowledge? And he said, we'll get back to you, John. He was very friendly, but very serious. And I thought, well, I'm never going to hear back on that. I guess I'll have to just, forget it. No, 6 weeks later, I got a message back through channels, different guy, said, oh, the DIA says, we see no reason this shouldn't be published. Why don't you publish it? So
nod, nod, wink, wink.
Nod, nod, wink, wink. They phrased their suggestion as a question. So I said, fine, very good. It shall be done. So I've considered I am the clueless tool of the federal government, but I'm also doing the right thing.
That actually makes a ton of sense now that Air Force Lieutenant Colonel outed Larry.
Yeah.
Because again, I'm reading into this, but it's just a theory.
We're reading the tea leaves.
You kind of have the group that wants to keep all this stuff a secret, and then you have the group that wants to disclose it. The Air Force is notorious about hiding all this stuff.
Yep, they are.
Whereas Larry was on the side of folks that kind of let it, I mean, again, I don't know for sure.
Well, all we can do is connect dots
Right
here,
But like you were saying earlier off camera, the Navy, the CIA, and the DIA, in your experience or the data points,
they seem to be wanting to end the cover up.
Right.
The Air Force is just silent.
And you and I are not saying that that's a fact. We're just
we don't know.
We don't know. Right.
I wrote a science fiction novel about the collapse of the UFO cover-up, and I had a reorganization occur. So it was Dion, Sion, and some other agency. I changed the names of the agencies just because it was a science fiction novel. And so I had basically the CIA and the DIA and the Navy pushing for disclosure and the Air Force resisting it. So where does this leave us, friends? The universe is a dive bar in Mos Eisley. I'm sorry it's the way it is, but it just is. But we have Obi-Wan Kenobi with us. And I studied this for a long time. It turns out Christianity, if you study it in the Greek, is a cosmic religion. It doesn't just talk about Earth. It talks about the word that is translated as world in the New Testament. In the King James Version is the word cosmos from the Greek. Means everything. When it says, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, that's the word cosmos. When he says, go out into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, it's the word cosmos. 90% of the time, when he uses the word world, it means the whole universe, because the Greeks were philosophers. The other words, by the way, translated as world were economios, which meant the Roman Empire, the economy, the Roman world. Hey, the Romans thought they were the center of the universe. The Greeks started saying stuff like their Earth orbits the sun and stuff like this. The Romans said, knock it off. Rome is on Earth and Rome is the center of the universe, right? Capiche? Are there any questions? And so the Romans were running everything. So they said the Earth is the center of the universe because we own it. We own the only parts of the Earth that are important to run. So that's where the Earth-centered universe became part of the Roman Catholic religion and everything. It wasn't until Copernicus. The Copernican revolution showed the Earth was not the center of the universe. We're going through a second Copernican revolution now, where we're going to find out we're not the center of the biological universe. We're not the only oasis in this vast desert we call the universe, and we own it. So it might as well be the center of the universe because it's the only living oasis in the universe. No. There are other oases out there with other people, and some of them are not very pleasant, unfortunately. Where does that leave us? It's like we're at a new high school, and it's a tough place. Okay, well, we came from a tough high school. We'll do okay. I believe truly in my heart that the vision of Star Trek for the human race, that's what the human race's future will look like. We're going to be quick learners, spacefaring. We're going to learn all these technologies from wherever. However, we happen to come in contact with some of these new technologies, we'll figure out how they work and copy them, and we'll have our own stuff. We will, Sean. You watch. Jack Sarfati and I have figured out unifying gravity and electromagnetism. Piece of cake.
Well, the hard part is making
these. If you're have strong enough electromagnetic fields, you can change gravity. If you change it a little bit, that's called inertialess drive. You can fly around corners. You can have anti-gravity. If you use very strong electromagnetic fields, then you can twist space-time into a pretzel and you get warp drive. Hey, just ask Jack. People say, Brandenburg, you don't know Jack. I said, yes, I do. And I agree with him on most things, except Rocky Road ice cream. He and I disagree on that. Whether it should be eaten with a sugar cone or a regular cone. There. So we don't agree on everything. And he agrees. We're not alone in the universe, and some of the people who are our neighbors are not very nice. Okay, we can deal with it.
Some are nice, right? It's just like anywhere else.
The only reason we're having this conversation, some of them have to be nice.
Mm-hmm.
We're apparently in a neutral zone in space. That means other powers are watching over us. They don't want anybody to gain control over this place in space. It's apparently strategic. Guess what? We're at the crossroads of the galaxy, apparently, right? About in the middle part of the galactic arms. And it's called the local void. We're exact center, apparently, of this big void in space where there are very few stars. We're right in the center of it. Imagine that. We're special. Why do you think we get so much attention, apparently?
Well, it might not be that we're special. It might be that the planet is special.
Yes. We may be considered an afterthought, but we're descended from a long line of tough customers. You know, I'm about half Irish. Irish are tough. They know life is hard. Got to fight sometimes. But I meant rhetorically.
That's right. We don't advocate violence on YouTube.
We don't believe in violence, you know.
So on disclosure, I don't want to take it too far afield, but
Sure.
where do you think we are in that? You've been following the Grush hearings and all that stuff.
I can tell you that when I worked in Washington, D.C., because of my Mars background, that I've been involved in the Mars investigation, people confided in me in classified offices. Basically, they told me all those things that Grush testified to. I heard that when I was in Washington, D.C. Now, you could say, was I hearing rumors around the coffee machine, maybe in the hall before and after big meetings?
You were told. That doesn't mean it was true.
I was told. It doesn't mean it's true.
Right.
Let's just say I heard all the same stuff that he reported. And the message of Mars and the message of all that stuff I heard is basically the same. We're not alone in the universe. There's a lot of stuff that has happened before we were around. We're new kids on the block. So we're not alone in the universe. We're not the first intelligent beings in the universe. And some of the people out there are not very nice. It's a tough neighborhood. Okay. We understand that. We can handle it. With God, guts, and guns, we will get through this. And I believe the future of humanity will look like Star Trek. I really, truly believe that. I believe that is a prophetic vision of the future, not just a highly entertaining show.
Yeah, like a precognitive sort of thing.
It's well, a lot of science, how much of science fiction turned out to be prophetic? Jules Verne, Trip to the Moon. He even got the launch site.
There's a book that I think he didn't publish because it was so fanciful. His editor didn't want to talk about it. But if Stephen Schwartz relates this story about him seeing a fax machine, like writing about fax machines.
There you go. That's even more important than going to the moon, the first fax machine, because that's the beginning of the internet.
Yeah, it's just very specific, oddly specific, right?
Well, he was a really smart guy, old Jules Verne. And the spacecraft is made out of aluminum. It's about the same size as the Apollo command module, weighed the same, had a 3-person crew, and it was launched from near Cape Canaveral in Florida. There. So that was all in Jules Verne. And he also wrote the story Master of the World, which is about a big airship. He wrote 2,000 Leagues Under the Sea, about basically a nuclear submarine. People say, well, it sounds like a science fiction movie, what I found on Mars. And if you want to watch a science fiction movie that has this scenario in it, it's Rocket Ship XM. Lloyd Bridges. They go up to Mars and they find out there was a nuclear war on Mars. So we'll get through this. It's a difficult period. We're starting at a new high school. It's a tough high school. Okay, well, we came from a tough high school. Once we get our bearings, we'll be okay.
Do you think this is going to come out in the next 2 years, or do you think they're going to suppress it for another?
It's going to come out,
80?
yes. It is going to come out. It has to come out. It's time. It's time. The first movie I ever saw with UFO abductions and bases on the moon was called The Mysterians. It was made by the same people who made the Godzilla movies in Japan. It's got all sorts of directed energy weapons, too. I urge everybody to watch it. Besides, Got some very attractive Japanese women in it. And they get abducted into flying saucers in the middle of the night. And then they got this.
Well, the Japanese have a long history with that. Isn't it Tsubune or something like that? Like,
oh yeah. But it's almost as if they got briefed by the CIA. We want you to make a movie for American audiences that shows this stuff. If you watch the movie The Thing, it's got animal mutilations, human mutilations in it.
By the way, that's my all-time favorite
The Thing?
science fiction horror movie. Yes, it's
a great science fiction horror movie.
Still holds.
Are you talking
today.
about the recent one or the original?
Well, there's one that was like in the 1950s. Then there was
that's the one I'm talking about.
The one I'm talking about is the John Carpenter version in the 1980s.
Oh yeah, that was very good, and it was much more true to the short story. Who goes there? That was really horrifying.
By John Campbell, right?
Yeah, I've only watched that a few times because it gives me bad dreams when I watch it, especially the head sprouting crab legs and walking across the floor. Yes, very unusual.
Looks over there. You've got to be freaking kidding me.
Gotta be. Where does he come up with this stuff? Oh, and then there's the Earth versus the flying saucers. So if you feel like we're in a 1950s science fiction movie, we are. 2001, they had the big space station, the space shuttle, docking with it. That's all happened. Jules Verne's trip to the moon, or First Man on the Moon by H.G. Wells. It's all happened in science fiction. So we are part of a science fiction adventure movie. That's the best way to look at it.
Yeah, I just wish they would let us in on it. That's what's driving me nuts.
Well, that's going to happen. It's happening. The dam has sprung a leak, and now it's starting.
If I had known about this stuff 25 years ago, my entire life would have been completely different. Like I would have gotten a PhD in some science field, but it's just a shame. It ended up diverting a bunch of our smartest people into like finance and into the tech field, like creating Facebook and Twitter.
They didn't want people solving this problem. This is viewed as a problem of civilian morale. In the Cold War, they were very concerned with civilian morale. I mean, in every war, you're cold or hot, the psychology of your civilian population is very important. Just ask the Germans and the Japanese during World War II when they started to lose. They made the people resist even more, be even more determined.
I mean, if they're not careful, the people are like, right now, people are pretty determined against, almost like it's a regime now. So, they better do something soon, because, I mean, this is...
Don't worry, Sean. There's nothing wrong with this country that can't be cured by a few good elections. Trust me. But this thing is ending. The ET cover-up is ending because it's time. And I myself feel like they should show leniency to the people who were involved. I know they're going to say they were just following orders. But at the same time, they were carrying out policies established by people like Truman and Eisenhower, who were good, solid guys.
Yeah, my view is they have this year. After that, no mercy. No mercy.
Oh.
This year is the year they have. And then after that, you have people who are you get scientists in the white that are getting boiled, like their spinal fluids getting boiled by directed energy weapons and things like that.
I know.
Like no mercy. No mercy.
Well, I'd rather not go into what stuff I've heard, but Gorish said that he knew that people who had been injured and even murdered, because there's a lethal force authorization on this thing. It's the most secret program on Earth. You should watch.
Look, if they were going to disclose something to the Russians or the Chinese, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
Well, the problem is, if you disclose it to the American public, you might as well be disclosing it to the Chinese and the Russians.
So, as an example, these weren't people who were in black programs who had signed security. They were people in the white who were just publishing papers on stuff that was related to these topics. So they had no idea that they were stepping into a place they.
Oh, I have been given picnic baskets and sent into fields to have a picnic, and they were minefields. And why are my bosses watching with binoculars from a nearby hilltop to see what happens to me? And then find out I'm gone into a minefield.
Are you sure that's? Is that figurative?
Had nothing to do with the UFO cover-up. We were sent on one scientific expedition that turns out we were poaching on a different department's programs. And and we didn't know. Nobody told us.
Oh my God! Did somebody deliberately do that, or was it accidental?
It was like, we pissed on this place and it's ours. You have no right to be investigating this problem. It's our problem. And we didn't know that. It was the politics of a major military lab. And we were sent by one department of the lab to investigate something. They gave us a grant to investigate this. And we found out later that problem was considered to be owned by another section of the lab. And I found out about it because I was sent to a conference to give a talk on our research. And I thought, a very good talk about the progress we'd made. And they hate that this people walked around talking trash about me from this other department, and we couldn't figure. And my boss figured it out because we were contractors. Oh no. They sent us into a minefield with a picnic basket just to see what would happen. It's okay. It's stuff like this happens in the military industrial complex. You get fiefdoms, you get territory. This hat does nothing to do with the UFO cover-up either.
If somebody did that to me, well, I'll tell you offline.
Well, you know what happened to me? I had to spend a night in the doghouse. My boss said, well, look, we know we were just following orders. So you're in the doghouse. Your name is mud around here for the next couple of days, Brandenburg. Then join me for lunch on Friday. It'll all be fine. So, he basically wanted to say that I'd received a good scolding, even though we were doing what we were told to do by the people who were paying us.
How did you find out you were? How did you figure out you were in a literal minefield?
Oh, because I just gave a perfectly reasonable technical report on research we'd done, and people reacted very angrily to it from this one department and went around saying that I was a poor scientist and my work was malarkey and all. And I knew it was solid work. And I realized, oh, okay. And they called up my boss and complained bitterly. Brandenburg is talking nonsense at this government-sponsored conference. And he said, what did you say? I said, here, I'll show you the view graphs. I just showed what we found. And then he made a few phone calls and he found out that we were sent to poach on a poaching expedition into somebody else's territory by this other department. That's okay. It just happens.
All right. So this is not a literal minefield. I just want to establish that.
No, it was not a literal minefield.
Okay, it's like a bureaucratic, like they just fed you into a buzzsaw, basically.
Imagine you're in some little, you're in Bavaria, which is part of Germany that used to be just Bavaria, but it's nowadays part of Germany. But in those days, it was its own little kingdom. And the people in Bavaria send you to this village to collect taxes. You find out later it's actually in Luxembourg, and you're collecting taxes
for Germany, right? For Bavaria.
So you went there and collected taxes like you did in Bavaria. You say, everybody come here to the town square. Have you got any money? Give it to us. We'll leave you alone. Then we left, and we found out, no, that village was not in Bavaria. It was in Luxembourg. And so
you're lucky they didn't kill you.
So we're lucky the Luxembourg army did.
Yeah, it was so bold and so matter of fact that people just assumed you knew what you were doing and paid you, right? Yeah.
So anyway, that's my experience in the military industrial complex when people think that certain territories are theirs and Nobody else can get involved. And anyway, Sean, it's an amusing. At the time, I was just really chagrined. Well, I will tell you though that when I first heard all this stuff about the UFO cover-up in Washington D.C., I came close to a nervous breakdown. I could not believe our government would be involved in something like this.
Yeah, it's like the Twilight Zone. It's like bizarre.
It's like the Twilight Zone.
Just tell the freaking truth. Just tell the freaking truth.
You know what saved me, Sean? I thought, well, things could be worse. I could be French.
They're actually more open.
The French government prides itself on not following rules of anybody.
Yeah.
Rules are for fools, as the French say, Rules are only to be observed from a safe distance, mon ami. Why?
All right, my friend. Any final words or advice or
yes.
predictions?
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's the final words. The message of Mars is it used to be like Earth. Then somebody attacked it with massive nuclear weapons, destroyed it. This happened before the time of the dinosaurs. Whoever did it is long gone. But it tells us the universe is a dangerous place. And one of the things that makes it dangerous is other intelligent life. Okay, so we're not alone in the universe. And some of our neighbors are not very nice. Sorry. God is with us. We'll get through this with pluck and luck. God, guts, and guns. We'll get through this period. We have to have this full disclosure. And we will eventually become just like in Star Trek. We will. I believe that in my whole heart. The God of the cosmos is with us. Look it up in the Greek, in the New Testament.
All right, my friend. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you again. And I'm sure we'll
Sean,
talk
it's been
again,
just
for
a
sure.
wonderful pleasure. I'm sorry if I occasionally became too verbose, but I've been thinking a lot about this. It's just a fascinating problem. You've got to admit, it's just a fascinating problem. Including the pathology of it is fascinating.
Well, just the fact that you're looking at the data clearly indicates there's a nuclear weapons signature, and you have people sticking their heads in the sand, and it's just like
when I said data. It was
right.
When I said it was natural nuclear reactors, everybody loved the idea
because it's peaceful.
When then I said, "Oh no, they were airbursts; they weren't underground like a natural nuclear reactor," and this xenon spectrum was wrong, then they immediately just looked at me and walked away.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, look. If it's true, if there's some like genocidal species out there, I mean, there's nothing we could do about it right now.
Well, hey, we can't exactly retreat 20 light years, can we?
Yeah, and
we've encountered the Klingons. Well, the thing is, there's a lot to be admired about the Klingons. Nobody messed with the Klingons.
Yeah, and it's interesting that there were two planets that were similar right next to each other, which lends to, You nuke one.
Earth and Mars, very similar.
Right.
That shows that planets like Earth and Mars, or like Earth, because Mars was like Earth, are very common in the cosmos.
Yeah.
Life is common. So it's, we're going to do this thing. We're going to do this thing. We're going to be like Star Trek.
All right, my friend.
We're going to boldly go. We're first to Mars and then the stars.
Well, not necessarily the first, but the first in recent memory. So thank you very much, my friend.
Thank you so much, John. It's been a pleasure and honor to be on your show. I really enjoyed talking with you.
You too.
If you enjoyed this video, please click on like, subscribe, and the notification button so that you're alerted anytime I post something new.